Welcome to the Cross Counsel Podcast. We believe negative emotions shouldn't run your life. We invite you to take a deep dive into this challenging transformational journey that goes far beyond this podcast. Join Executive Director and expert facilitator Steve Freitag and me, John Crevillian, as we discuss how to deeply experience the love and truth of Jesus. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, John Crevillian, and I'm joined with my co-host, Steve Freitag. How are you, sir?
Again with the show. All
I
right,
love
yes. it. All right, we're going to, sing and dance for you next.
Welcome to the big leagues.
That's right.
We can keep making it worse. Don't worry. How are you, man?
Good. Well, I'm trying to get over a little bug, but It's 70 degrees right now in February.
Oh my gosh, I know.
I know this is going to air in March, but still. And then I guess we get a snowstorm tonight. But
you guys do? Over in Madison?
So. Yeah,
oh,
they said
dang.
It could be messy driving conditions in the morning, but
sure, yeah. Yeah, no, over here in La Crosse, it's 65 right now, and man, I'm excited to go take a walk today. But it's going to drop to 25, and then over the weekend, it's supposed to be 70 plus degrees. And so I count this as God's grace in my life. I love it. This is the land is healing as far as I'm concerned. So I love it.
Jenny and I went for a walk today. And I was just noticing the grass where it just looks so sad right now. It's so pushed down, but it's like even our roses are starting to green a little bit.
Oh,
just,
cool.
Psych tomorrow. Cool.
yeah, just in time for the cold snap.
Right.
I forget where I saw it, but I think we're in the middle of Fool's Spring, as it's called. You start to think, hey, maybe it's going to get better. And then it cold snaps and kills everything again.
Right.
But, and then real spring follows afterwards. But anyways, I completely lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? I don't even remember. Yeah, no, my girlfriend, she has her first big corporate job right now. Right. And so she's gone from working Quick Trip, kind of in a rough part of town where she's always on her feet and dealing with stuff and juggling a million things all at once to working in a closed cubicle environment. So every time I talk to her now, she's like, hey, do you want to go for a walk or something? I can't be inside right now. I got to be moving around. And I'm like, yeah, for sure, girl. Let's do it.
Yeah.
But it's funny to watch, the downside of a nice cushy job.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And man, I could talk about the good weather all day. You know this about me. Mary knows this about me. But we should get started with what's actually awesome about what we're going through right now. The living water testimonies. We still have a few more left to go. And I'm excited. I've loved the ones that we've gone through so far. So many different people have been affected, and they're all going to that church, which is cool to see all that transformation that's happening there. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So we're going to get started in just a minute with the next one. But first we're going to get a quick word from Jenny.
Paul prays in Ephesians 3 that we would be rooted and established in love that surpasses knowledge, so that we may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. At Cross Counsel, it's miraculous to watch people transform by the love and truth of Jesus. But some people need a little extra help. We never turn anyone away because of their inability to cover their session fees. Would you be willing to cover that cost for somebody who is looking for freedom from something in their life? We are inviting you to be a part of what Cross Counsel is doing here. Would you be willing to donate to cover someone? Bless them, though you've never met them. You can do that today at crosscounsel.com.
So the first one up here is actually one of our guys from an old level 1 class, our friend Jason. What do you want to tell the people about Jason?
I think Jason is the every guy. I think
he really is, honestly.
Right? He's so relatable, I think, for just about every guy. And he talks about how you don't have to have experienced a ton of trauma to benefit from what we do here. This isn't a trauma ministry. This is about God renewing our minds, transforming our lives, and just to take opportunity for every moment where we know that whatever we're thinking or believing deep inside or feeling in our hearts, if it's not in alignment with Him, if it's not peaceful, then it's a chance for us to take a look and see how we have been skewed just a little bit. And first, I want to make sure that for people who didn't watch or listen to the podcast from last week, he does start out with mentioning Mary, and that's Mary who gave a testimony right before him, and they were just concurrent, but we're splitting it up on the podcast. But I think Jason, he's a rock. He really is.
Yeah.
And when you talk about somebody like Jason who recognizes that he's stressed out, I think everybody should take note, because take note of what he's saying, and then we'll have a discussion on stress after we listen to the testimony. So.
Absolutely. We'll go ahead and get started now.
Jason, come on up. All right.
You were a tough act to follow, Mary. I don't know. It was maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I think. And I was going through a rough time. I was in a job that I hated, and it was super stressful. And add that to the normal stress of life with a wife and 5 kids, and I needed help. All the strategies that I had relied on at that point to manage my emotions were failing me. If you've heard Steve talk about the guy whose Mr. Spock was his hero growing up, that was me. I initially, like many of you, went for some counseling, and that helped a little, and I felt a little educated, but it didn't really help me. I went to the doctor and I said, I'm stressed out and I can't handle my emotions. And he said, yeah, you and every other 40-year-old guy I see, so that was no help either. So I knew of Steve and Cross Counsel from, we had been in the same churches, Mad City Church, Damascus Road Church. So I said to give it a try. And to be honest, I don't even remember what we covered in some of those early sessions. But how it changed me is that I began to embrace my emotions instead of hating. I've seen Steve a few other times when issues have come up, and every time it was helpful. When I saw last year that Cross Counsel was offering classes on the MELT process, I felt prompted by the Holy Spirit to sign up. I was like, okay, I'm still working on the last thing you asked me to do, God. Is this really, what right now? Yes. So I've taken the level 1 and level 2 courses now, and recently, as a follow-up to those classes, Shane has graciously allowed me to sit in on his sessions with Steve, which we'll hear from in a minute, so that I can observe the MELT process in action on someone else, which is very different when it's happening on you. So the thing I want everyone to know is this. This ministry is not just for people who've been through traumatic events. Thank God for how it's helped people who go through that, but you don't have to go through a traumatic event to believe things that aren't true about yourself. Cross Counsel is for everyone because everyone needs healing and everyone needs more Jesus. I'm now in a place where I don't bury my emotions anymore. And when painful ones surface, I turn to Jesus and let him take me through memories to look for lies that I've believed about myself. I still need help from time to time, but the reason I wanted to get involved with this ministry is because of the lasting change it's brought to my life. Thanks.
Awesome. Jason is like such a classic dude in my mind, even when he was going through the level 1 and I was like the tech guy kind of behind the scenes. Every time he would like chirp up with some comments, I would always be like, man, that's so true. This dude's real wise. I really liked his testimony, even though, like I like how short and concise it was. So it was really cool to listen to them.
Right. And so there's a thing about stress, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, but stress, I think we have to take a look at it from the perspective of what's really happening now. He's talking about a time in his life where work was demanding a lot of him, not to mention his 5 kids. Now, most of his kids are now adults, but there is reality to the stress of a life like that, where you're trying to manage a marriage, a family, and work. But then what accelerates the feeling of the stress is what we also believe in that. And when we have beliefs, and I'm not talking about Jason specifically, but just us in general, how deeply some of us believe that we are a failure, that we are worthless, that we'll never be good enough, those kind of things. That just makes the reality of what we're going through even more challenging, to say it mildly. And so it really is a good opportunity to take a look at what needs to be shaved off, what needs to be realigned, so that I can face those things that I'm being called to. And I've been struck lately, just going through the Bible in a year and in the Old Testament, just what people were called to by God. And John, I know this is just off the top of my head and asking you to react to this.
Okay.
But if I were to make a statement that says, or just ask a question, does God expect anything from you?
I think he says, if you love me, then you will obey my commands.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm. So. And when he says, pick up your cross and follow me.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
There's that weight of responsibility. So I am constantly trying to come into equilibrium with what's true, not only for my own heart's sake, but like how I view the world, which can't be separated in some ways. But there was a season where it was just, God loves you and he doesn't ask anything of you, and he loves you. And I do believe it's true that even if we didn't do anything for God, he would still love us.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the outgrowth of that, if people just sit in that, then they miss out on kingdom work.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that one of the things that causes us to struggle so much in life is that we spend so much time trying to avoid hard things.
Yeah, actually, absolutely.
We defer hell, quite honestly. Like, oh, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. And then our I'll get to that list gets so long that it just crushes us.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at what kind of difference can I make in the world? What is God calling me to? And maybe it's not within the walls of a church. Maybe it's outside the walls of a church. Maybe it is, how am I looking at people who are coming here from this country as immigrants? How can I participate in their flourishing? How can I make a difference in their life, if that's what I'm called to? Or the homeless, or the widows and the orphans? What am I being called to here?
Yeah. Asking like what God has planned for you, what good works he has planned for you is super important. And, and I think that a lot of times he aligns, like when we are in alignment with God, the desires of our heart will lead us towards the plan that he has in place for us. Mm-hmm. I really think that.
It's funny that you bring that verse up, because that's what, Ephesians 2:10?
I think so.
Yeah. And I think we get so individualistic at times in our faith. And I do believe that it's that if I was the only person that was ever born and I, sinned, that I think that Jesus would have died on the cross for me. I mean, that's sort of a silly thought, because it's not anywhere close to reality. But so I think there is an individualism that is very important. But I think being in this country, I think we miss out on the communal aspect of things. Miss out on some of the corporate things. And even with the good works that God has prepared in advance for us, I do think that it can be both. It can be, there are certain things, even Jason says, you're asking me to do this when you've already asked me to do this. Like, what's the deal, God? Mm-hmm. So I do think there are specific things when we are attentive to his voice in our life that he's calling us to. But I also think there are general things that he's calling all of us to, that it's, well, who wants to take care of this? As he moves to and fro in the earth, right? His eyes are looking for those people who want to be a friend of God, people he can count on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the more stability that we get in our hearts, the more that we can take a look around and do that work. So I think Jason is a great example of that. And it's I wanted my kids to have a boring testimony.
Yeah, there you go.
And I'm not saying anything about Jason again. I wanted my kids. I didn't want my kids to say, well, yeah, I grew up in this Christian home, and then I, did drugs and sex and rock and roll, that whole thing, right? And I did all these different things, and then I came back to Jesus. Okay, those are awesome testimonies when they happen.
Yeah.
But I think it's better just to live a life of steadiness and to, as much as you can, be in alignment with the Lord throughout your whole life. The Daniel life, like Daniel is so hard for me to relate to, because he almost seems perfect.
Awesome stuff from Jason. We do have another testimony today from a gentleman by the name of Shane. What do you know about Shane?
Well, unlike Jason, Shane did have a bit of a turbulent childhood.
Okay.
And a lot of pain in his life, a lot of abuse, and he'll share a little bit about that. I mean, Shane's testimony could be 3 hours long, just his time with Cross Counsel. So it's awesome, and how well he puts this together and just nails it. And I love that he'll share about this, but he really checked us out, listening to several podcasts, and it's the reason why we do this. It's to get the word out like that.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I think we should just let it play.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm Shane, and I've been coming to Cross Counsel since August of this year. First, I want to tell you about myself and what brought me here. I had a rocky start to life, having young parents who both came from broken homes. I experienced a lot of dysfunction stemming from drug and alcohol abuse in my home, sexual abuse at the hands of a neighbor boy, and many other things. As a young man, I started using drugs to escape my reality. Thankfully, eventually my parents quit drinking and became Christians, which is what led me to be able to place my faith in Jesus as well. Although the core issues of my past had at this point still gone unaddressed. During my senior year of high school, I was listening to some dark, heavy metal music that triggered memories of the sexual abuse from my childhood, and I suddenly realized that what happened to me was not normal, and I sank into a dark depression. After confiding in a friend that I was thinking about committing suicide, he called my parents and told them he was worried about me. My parents got me into counseling right away, and that was my first experience in the chair. Although that method of counseling didn't address the core feelings I had buried inside, it did provide a way for me to reframe the past, and I was at least able to move forward without wanting to end my life. As an adult, I found myself struggling with substance abuse in various forms. As time went on, I began to realize that this was not a sustainable pattern. In 2018, I had been working long hours at my job, and my mother-in-law had just passed away from cancer. These events triggered what I consider some form of a mental breakdown, and my emotional walls began to crumble. I knew I needed help, so I set out to find a place that could help me sort through my issues. The first place used traditional talk therapy, and it did help in that it provided a safe space to share some of the things I kept closely guarded, but it still did not address the core issues I had inside. I eventually stopped going and found myself in the same cycles as before. I found another place that used more advanced methods of therapy, and I did see some wins there. That was the first time I had experience with going back to childhood memories and allowing myself to feel them for the first time. I realized how significant some of those events were and how they shaped my behavior up to that point. And after going through the melt process later with Cross Counsel, I can now see that the insights I had received at that place fell in line with the first half of the melt process, the M and the E. But it didn't yet address the false beliefs that I had internalized. So I again found myself repeating cycles of past behaviors. Around this time, I began to hear about Cross Counsel through the Men of Fire group here at Living Water. I began listening to the podcast regularly, and I couldn't deny the power of the testimonies I would hear on there, which is really why I'm up here, because that was huge for me. After experiencing a bout of anxiety on a recent camping trip, I knew that I had more work to do still. So this time I set up my first session with Cross Counsel. To date, I have seen I've seen results in some form during each session, but I had a profound moment of truth that I experienced in my most recent session just a few weeks ago. That session was inspired by a situation that happened between my wife and I, where I reacted, in my opinion, like an immature little boy. I came into my session wanting to dig at whatever was underneath that event, and I went to 4 or 5 memories from my childhood. Not long after that, I experienced a peace and warmth like I've heard several other people describe. It came over me and I just started crying. It was as if the Lord drew a line through all those memories and showed me that I had felt unsafe in all of them. And after that, I felt the Lord tell me that He was safe. The effect that this had on me was immediate. Although I had known in my head that Jesus was safe, I knew that my heart just believed it for the first time. I felt like a weight had been lifted off of me. When I got home, I shared my experience with my wife and my 2 older kids, explaining how the past memories connected to the present. And as the next few weeks unfolded, I noticed I didn't feel the same desire to guard my heart like I used to. I wanted to share my experience with as many people as I could because it was so powerful to me. I shared my story with several guys at the Men of Fire group, with some friends, and even my dad, who was able to confirm one of those memories and offer his own perspective on it. All these experiences felt like a domino effect to me, like God was showing me how when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and honest, He will use our pain and bring something good from it. I think it was no coincidence that at this time I was reading through Ezekiel 37, which is about his vision of the valley of dry bones. It was as if He was showing me that it's not enough to get the skeletons out of the closet. He wants to put tendons and flesh on them and put them to use. He wants to breathe life into the dark recesses of our minds so we can experience His love in full measure.
Awesome. Cool stuff. Cool stuff from Shane. Yeah, I guess, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, I'd love to hear yours, but I just love how he talked about the core issues. He's a seeker. That's what he is. He's a seeker, and he sought out
Yeah.
counsel, and some stuff wasn't very helpful. And then he actually went somewhere where they did start to deal with more on the emotional side and dealing with your history and the things that have shaped you. But it's like I can't put a finer point on it. The difference between just retreading old things in your history and actually identifying what's going on inside. Because as we've said a million times, it's not what's happened to us that shapes us. It's what we've believed in those places that shape us. And that's not a very common message. It's so easy just to say, well, it's just our family of origin and our history and that kind of thing. Of course, that's all part of it, but until you just look at it from the standpoint of what you've believed at the very core of who you are, because 2 people can go through the same event and interpret it different ways. And so for him to recognize that the M and the E were in play, and I love the progression that God took him on in his journey of freedom. So, yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, honestly, the M and the E, like kind of him being introspective enough to like get that started and to look at those first couple letters of the melt process without even knowing what it was to some degree, and kind of finding the rest of it. That's so cool. And honestly, like what really touches me is just, the fact that he started out just kind of like listening to the podcast and stuff like that. That's so cool. That means a lot to me as someone who like helps make this happen. It's cool to see that God is using that and that people are getting value out of that. So, yeah.
Exactly. And how he came full circle. Right? When he went that additional step, came and saw us and started to identify some of the beliefs, those lies, right? The memory and the emotion, he addressed those to some extent, but not until he really got to the bottom of those lies that he had been carrying for a long time, And that's not the end of the story. We have to receive, to be open to God's truth and his transformation. And that's just life-changing. And so, yeah. from being on, from listening to the podcast and being inspired by the testimonies to being an inspiration to others. How amazing is that?
Man, that's God, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, honestly, that's great. Also, very interesting that both these guys kind of went through the traditional like talk therapy route, and they got varying levels of something from that, but like talking in and of itself, like logicking your way through it, was only like maybe a few fragments of the actual problem, not the problem itself. So it's a real honor to be part of a ministry that can help people and reach those core issues, those core lies, those core emotions, and just start allowing Jesus to, inviting Jesus in rather, to heal those moments, those broken moments. So.
Right. And the evidence in his life, how he feels different, and like all of us, we're still a work in progress, but that he could even reach out to his dad and say, hey, how do you remember this? And that some of the things that his dad said just brought things into even greater understanding. More of the pieces were put back in the proper place. And what does that say when you've grown up in a crazy environment for a while as parents came to Christ, which obviously made a huge difference, but to be able to have those kind of dialogues and he's talked to other people in his family, and it's just so cool. And he's the kind of guy that's like, hey, Steve, I want to share this. Can I share this? We don't have to pull that out of him. He's one of those guys as well. He takes the initiative in that. So, and again, and just because I don't want to leave it laying here either, is the Ezekiel and the dry bones. Like, how cool is that? The idea of putting tendons and flesh on those dry bones so that we can be useful in the kingdom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This has been the Cross Council Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, share with your friends, and look for us on social media. The world will become a much better place, and Jesus will be seen in a much better light the more we are transformed by his truth and love. We'll see you next time, everybody.